Hello there. Very good morning and welcome to your 10 a.m. update from the People's Progressive Party. I'm your host, Eddy Layne, and I'm joined this morning by Nigel Dharamlall, Central Committee member of the People's Progressive Party. I hope I got that right, or is it executive member? Nigel, good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Edward, and good morning to our viewers and listeners. I'm very happy to be with you on this cold morning.
Yeah, heavy rains and winds this morning. Nigel, the Caribbean Court of Justice is expected to rule um, on that appeal within a matter of hours. Um, from the onset, maybe we should establish the fact that while the People's Progressive Party Civic will have appealed the Court of Appeal ruling at the CCJ, maybe to establish the fact that while the CCJ ruling is important, as it will prevent precedents in the future with regards to abuse of the court, especially with what the AP and UFC did with the Court of Appeal, there is absolutely no relation between the Court of Appeal, the CCJ's ruling, and the declaration by GECOM, save and except for that stay that the CCJ would have ordered, and the fact that GECOM has already established the figures that are to be used in order for a declaration to be made.
Yes, that's correct, Edward. The CCJ is, what is happening now at the CCJ is basically a gap filler until the Guyana Elections Commission meets to have the results declared and to set in motion the swearing in of the next president, the democratically elected president. The Caribbean Court of Justice, what is before it currently, is an appeal by the People's Progressive Party Civic, specifically our leaders, Dr. Bar Jabdio and Dr. Irfan Ali, our presidential candidate, now deemed president, is that we are claiming that the CCJ has jurisdiction to hear a matter that the Guyana Court of Appeal heard, which we think they didn't have jurisdiction to hear. Irrespective of how the CCJ rules, the Constitution mandates the Guyana Elections Commission to declare the results of the elections. There are a few scenarios that can happen. You are correct also that the CCJ, having put a stay on the orders that were requested by AP and UFC as in David at the Guyana Court of Appeal level, that no declaration ought to be made until all of these issues are sorted out. If the CCJ rules that they have jurisdiction to hear this case, then they can do two things. They can throw out the issue of the directions of the, or the decisions of the Guyana Court of Appeal, which are one, that they had jurisdiction to hear the matter, and two, that they sought to interpret the, or insert a word called valid onto what is described in the Constitution as votes cast. We already have a history of what Lowenfield did when he sought to use the deliberations or ruling of the Guyana Court of Appeal to insert his own figures onto the report that he ought to have presented to the Guyana Elections Commission. And that report basically disenfranchised over 115,000 persons in our country. We also saw in that report where he discredited the entire elections process. And we saw a process that he himself had earlier described as credible, free and fair. We also saw where he reduced from 3 days prior to, in one of his declarations, 3 days prior to this last one that he made on the 22nd of June, he reduced his own votes from or sorry, he increased his from 125,000 for APNU to 177,000. And for the People's Progressive Party Civic, he increased from 56,000 to 166,000. In his earlier declaration, he had disenfranchised 275,000 plus persons. Now he reduced it to one. So his numbers are all over the place. Irrespective of how the CCJ rules, Article 162 of the Constitution allows GECOM, or it dictates and prescribes the functions of GECOM. One of those functions has to do with the declaration of results in a way that GECOM ought to act impartially, fairly, and in compliance with the Constitution. So we believe that even if Lowenfield presents again his own concocted figures, that Article 162, 1B of the Constitution gives GECOM the authority to set aside his submissions and, in compliance with the Constitution, ruling fairly and impartially, put up recount figures that will show the proper declaration that ought to be made. This happened in 2011, I think, if my memory serves me right.
Yes.
When GECOM had to correct a mistake made or an error made at that time by the Chief Elections Officer in his submission of a report to the Commission. And the Commission directed that the report ought to be corrected. I would suspect that the same will happen again, unless, of course, Lowenfield gets a divine intervention and he starts to act fairly and he acts honestly. So I think all things being equal, the ball is in the court of the Guyana Elections Commission, and particularly in the play area of the Guyana Elections Commission chairperson, who, despite all of what has happened and all the criticisms, she has basically acted on the side of the law, and we expect her to continue to do so as the next few days proceed.
I just want, Nigel, you mentioned Article 162B. Maybe I should just read the entire section there, B, so that people understand the powers of GECOM, because this has been a point of contention, at least for the APNU AFC, where they somehow sought to give the impression that the CEO's report, GECOM has to live with that. They have to work with that, whether or not those figures are fabricated, are not reflective of the elections. So it says here in Article 162B, and it talks about GECOM functions of the article in terms of administering the elections, etc., etc. But B says, GECOM shall issue such instruction and take such action as appear to it necessary or expedient to ensure impartiality, fairness, and compliance with the provisions of this Constitution, or of any act of Parliament on the part of persons exercising or powers or performing duties connected with or relating to the matters aforesaid, which is tantamount to what you said just now. Lowenfield is to present the fraudulent figures.
And that also covers the statutory function of Lowenfield, where he has to comply by submitting a report, a summary of the observation or the observations made, as well as a tabulation of the recount numbers that were already declared by all 10 officers or what we call the tabulation supervisors that were part of the GECOM exercise, that is the recount, on the Order 60 of 2020. So the Constitution is very clear. I think the language is very simple. If the court, the CCJ, and I feel that CCJ has jurisdiction, it is our apex court or final court. We also stand strong that the CCJ acts in the sovereignty of our country. The CCJ, despite it is being based in Trinidad, it is part of the legal infrastructure of Guyana. So it is part of our sovereignty, and they can also, and that court can pronounce on all issues legal in our country. In our country. So I know there are lots of criticisms, there are vile attacks, vitriolic remarks made by agents of the APNU AFC, both here in Guyana and out of Guyana, towards the CCJ to intimidate them. But I think that those are our esteemed judges in the Caribbean. And those refined, judicious people, they will stand above all the criticisms. I expect them to disregard all those criticisms, because what they're ruling for a democracy, and they're ruling for the future of the people of the Caribbean and the Commonwealth. So I do not think that the attacks by the APNU on the judges and those associated with the judges, and on the court, and on CARICOM, and on leaders of our CARICOM, that they're going to be taken in hand as decisions are made by the Caribbean Court of Justice. The Caribbean Court of Justice, they've always ruled fairly, impartially, and in compliance with our constitution. So I expect it will remain that way.
I also want to add to what you said there, Nigel, the fact that we've seen, and these attacks are not just limited to the Caribbean Court of Justice. We've seen attacks on regional leaders, prime ministers and former prime ministers. We've seen attacks on the ABCEU countries. We've seen attacks on the OAS and the Commonwealth, all because all of these people who I would have mentioned, and organizations would have stood on the side and continue to stand on the side of democracy, the rule of law, and to ensure that the will of the people prevail in this exercise. What is important and is comforting is the fact that despite these vile attacks and threats from the APNU AFC towards the CCJ, the reality is that the APNU AFC, fortunately, will not be in office to be able to implement or to make reality those attacks and those threats of leaving CARICOM and leaving the CCJ and all sorts of things. But the issue is, and the fact is, Nigel, is that when you look at the APNU AFC over the last few months in particular, you're seeing the PNC that all of us would have read about in the Barnum era of wanting to bully their way, wanting to intimidate people. It's either their way or no other way. But that will not work in this 21st century. They have tried to bully a whole host of regional leaders, like I mentioned earlier, and organizations, and they stood strong. Look, just a few days ago, a U.S. congressman wrote to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, informing him that he's standing with Pompeo to ensure that democracy and the rule of law is maintained in Guyana, and he's willing to offer his support. Matter of fact, he offered his support to Pompeo in any way possible that he can ensure he can play a role, and if it means sanctioning or hold people accountable who sought to undermine the democratic principles of Guyana or anywhere in the world.
Well, I think that the PNC, they are left in a bygone era, and what they're doing is not for the 21st century. The world is a different place, and democracy, irrespective of where we live, freedom, democracy are what everyone desire at any point in their lives. And so all of what they're doing, what they're attempting to do, their acts of bullyism, that is not going to take them anywhere forward. It is actually making the PNC to be in a retrograde direction, in a backward, uncivilized direction. And so I believe that it is important that the law-abiding people, the fair-minded people, the constitutionally compliant people, and the people who believe in freedom and democracy, that we continue to stand our ground and we walk that road that is going to take our country to greater phases of development. I also believe, like hundreds of thousands of others, that those who undermine our democracy or any democracy in this world, that they must be held accountable. And I am of the firm view that the statement by the US State Department, no less a person than the Secretary of State, that must initiate action to show these rigors of elections, those authoritarian individuals and those who do not believe in democracy, that this world is not a world where they will prosper. And so actions ought to be taken against them. And I suspect that actions have already been taken against them, that personal sanctions have already started to flow in their direction. And what we are seeing now is basically some drowning people clutching at straws as they are sinking or as they are drowning. And so we expect that the more they continue to delay the inevitable, which is to have a democratic transition in our country, that more sanctions will come upon them. And it will extend from their person onto the other individuals associated with them and the endeavors that they pursue in their own economic interests or business interests, that those are also going to be affected by their actions, which are to rig the elections in Guyana. So I do believe that sanctions need to be placed on these individuals. And I also am aware that as soon as there is a democratic transition into government of Dr. Irfan Ali, that we intend to pursue all those who have rigged the elections in Guyana, who have attempted to rig the elections in Guyana, that justice must be meted out to the individuals who suffered as a result.
Nigel, when you talk about sanctions and when we talk about persons, I think it's willful ignorance on the part of APNO, AFC, and its leaders to try to invoke this term sovereignty. Every time somebody speaks out against them for attempting to steal elections, um, you hear they invoke this word sovereignty. Leave us alone. We're independent. Um, Guyana is a sovereign nation. Stay out of our business. But one will recall not very far ago, back to 2015, when then President Donald Ramotar utilized a constitutional provision to prorogue the parliament. It wasn't an illegal act. It wasn't an unconstitutional act. It was something that was in the Constitution. No less a person than David Granger himself um, stood sat on the national television talking about making Guyana a pariah state and sanctions, persons needed to be sanctions and how it will affect the country and a whole host of things. So I think it's willful ignorance. Deliberately, they're pleading ignorance. But what is interesting is one of their very own, Carl Greenidge, when he spoke prior to the eve of the border case at the ICJ, made it clear that you can't just pick and choose when you're going to talk about sovereignty. You can't pick and choose when you want the international community as your friends. And what is interesting in what he said, and I want to read a little piece of what he said here, very instructive statement. He said, um, let me get that exact. He said, he talked about sovereignty and how persons are invoking and using sovereignty for their personal agenda. And he made this very strong statement. He said, if you have acted properly, you don't have to at the same time prove that you acted properly by censoring other people and shouting them down for voicing their views. And I think that statement was directed at the Harmons and the Grangers and so on who were shouting people down. He reminded also, Nigel, that when the South Africans, the apartheid in South Africa, Guyana was a very, very loud voice. The PNC was in power at that time, I think, if I'm correct. And we didn't look at South Africa's sovereignty then. We didn't want them to say stay out because it's our internal business. In 2015 again, and I'm trying to make the point, they ran behind the international community for support to ensure elections were held and all sorts of things. So you can't you can't want it both ways. As I say, you can't want your cake and eat it at the same time or something of that sort. They seem to want it both ways.
Yeah, well, I think those are characteristics of a loser mentality. And that is exactly what has happened. They are at the point of no return. They have realized that, well, they are aware, sorry, that they have lost the elections. And they are basically, out in the wide open sea, all by themselves.
Making enemies.
They're basically making noise that really doesn't make sense. Funnily, though, the very things that Granger stood for in 2015 are the very things that he's against just a mere 4.5 to 5 years after. That is what you call double standards. That is what you call hypocrisy. And it shows that it is a person who doesn't have leadership mettle. It is a person who doesn't have competence to understand the dynamics of the world. And it also shows a total lack of ignorance of your own people and what happens in your own country. Sovereignty, when we say sovereignty belongs to the people, that doesn't mean that every single illegal act that happens, every single unconstitutional act that happens, that people must not speak out against. Our sovereignty is not determined, as Granite said, and you clearly read just now, it is not for us to pick and choose. One day we can be a sovereign state, and then tomorrow, when it is not in our favor, we, uh, we are something else. And I think he served as foreign minister for a while. And I think it was incumbent upon him to speak out against what has happened. The only thing he was left to say was that he was speaking directly to Nagamutu and to Granger and to Harman and to the Katiuses and the Voila Lawrences and the executives of the PNC, of which I think he's part also. So it is quite telling, and I think the US ambassador a few months ago also outlined the reasons why, as well as the Canadian High Commissioner. Why is it that they're speaking on these issues? These issues are not just alien to Guyana, but Guyana operates under the CARICOM, the civil charter that we have that we signed on to in CARICOM, and also the provisions of the OAS and of the Commonwealth and of the United Nations. So we don't exist alone. So sovereignty for us cannot just be because we want to describe it the way we want to describe it. Sovereignty is also how we relate to others in the world. And in a classic case, for example, Granger's government or regime, they are now claiming that the CCJ doesn't have jurisdiction, quote unquote, sovereignty on this matter. But at the ICJ, it is something else. Right? They're claiming that the ICJ has jurisdiction to look into our border issues. So they have to decide where they stand. But they can all decide that as they masticate in opposition in the next few very many years. They're going to be there. They're practically in opposition. And so it is only a matter of institutionalizing it. And I hope that after this decision at 3 o'clock this afternoon by the Caribbean Court of Justice, that GECOM will be summoned to meet very shortly, possibly tomorrow. And maybe Friday we have a greater idea, a better idea of how we're moving forward in terms of our timelines. I still stand firm that the chair of GECOM will act according to the law. The chair of GECOM did send a letter to Lowenfield outlining the parameters of the report, and we expect that in moving forward, that the chair will stand where she was standing on those parameters and continue to forge ahead to have our elections declared based on the recount figures. So I wish to urge all involved do not fall prey or be entrapped by the bullyism of APNU AFC, whether in Guyana, out of Guyana. Do not be entrapped by them, and they're protesting because they have basically taken our democracy for granted and tried to rig the elections, which they have clearly lost by over almost 25,000 votes. When you add the small parties and the People's Progressive Party, so it is almost 25,000 votes that they've lost the elections by.
Nigel, and you spoke about the GECOM chair outlining, and I want to close on this note, the provinces within which GECOM can operate and Lowenfield. Lowenfield has to realize that he has 3 private criminal charges hanging over his head. And if he thought that he had acted correctly and in conformity with the Constitution, then he would have appeared in court and he would not have been dodging the court staff who were trying to serve him those charges. But he has to realize, and maybe we should let him know, and maybe if his friends are looking at the program, they can inform him that those charges are indictable offenses he would have committed, and they carry some serious penalties in as much as life imprisonment. So he has to make that determination if he wants to take one for the team, for the APNU AFC team, and continue to operate the way he's operating illegally, unconstitutionally, and trying to bully an entire nation into accepting fraudulent results in favor of the PNC. I want to say quickly that you outlined earlier that Lowenfield himself rather submitted in his first report to the commission the valid votes, 460,000 plus valid votes, of which the PP received 233,330, and APNU AFC 217,920. The fact of the matter is there's a difference of 15,420, and nothing can change that. Nothing can change that, because that is a reflection of the will of the people of this country. So Lowenfield can continue to play a gangster, whether it's a sanctimonious one or not. He has to continue to make that decision, but he has to also understand that there are penalties, there are consequences when you take certain actions.
Well, Lowenfield in no way could be a sanctimonious gangster. Lowenfield is a barefaced criminal. And there's nothing godly about what Lowenfield has done. Right? Or sanctimonious about
what he did.
what he has done. Lowenfield is a barefaced criminal. And I would like to see going forward that he faced those charges. And we cannot continue to sweep under the carpet these egregious matters, where the CEO of the Elections Commission can be the obstacle to a democracy and hold up a nation for almost 4 months. People are dying right now of COVID.
Well, over 4 months, because we're way past the 2nd of July.
Exactly. People are suffering tremendously because of the continuous situation that is happening in our country. Businesses cannot function because of the economic crises that we have in our country. So whether Lowenfield presents a report or not, Lowenfield will have his day in court, or his days in court, and possibly his days at Lusignan, Mazzaroni, Camp Street. I guess they will have to make that determination. But what is important is we have to have a declaration based on the recount numbers. And the chair of GECOM has to ensure that that happens. And so the next few hours until the CCJ rules, whether they have jurisdiction or not, and whether the Guyana Court of Appeal can insert the word valid into our constitution without a referendum or without any sort of constitutional reform, that the mechanics of getting the GECOM meeting in order should be put in place. And I would like to see some sort of declaration be made properly, if not Friday, sometime during the course of the weekend. And I'm all positive that the chair of GECOM will continue to stand by her instructions to Lowenfield and stand by Article 1621B of the Constitution, which gives GECOM the authority to act fairly, impartially, and in compliance with the Constitution. Our elections were held on March 2nd. They were free, fair, credible. Votes were counted. Only the valid ones were actually counted. The rejected ones and the spoiled ones were not counted. And so all that has happened over the last 4 months, we're into the 5th month now. The APNU AFC, whilst they have been hanging on to power, engaging in hundreds of millions, possibly billions of dollars worth of corruption and corrupt activities. Up until this morning, yesterday, I've read where hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts are still being given out, where prime state lands are being given. For example, I saw in the newspapers this morning, former Member of Parliament Jermaine Figueira received state lands a few days ago from the coalition. The mayoress of Linden, Wanika Arundel, also receiving state lands. But what about the thousands of people in Region 10 and specifically Linden who are still without jobs, who still require amenities in their homes, utilities in their homes, require their own house lot and their own homes? What has become of them as the hundreds of thousands of people across our country? So I think that we need to cut this short, and the chairperson needs to stand her ground and get this matter over with. Granger is just playing for time, and I recently met with some friends of mine as well as individuals who support the APNUFC. And I made the point that one of the things which I think that this coalition has been doing whilst they're being corrupt, and very deliberately so, they have also been buying time to deflect the blame on their poor performance and their incompetence so that their supporters will find some other party and when I say party, I mean it in the third person sense, to blame for their loss. They're going to blame the CCJ, they will blame the Private Sector Commission, of course they will blame the PPP, as always. They will blame GECOM, and you know, at one time they were blaming Lowenfield when when they could not get their Mingo declarations done and for Granger to be sworn in. So what is happening now is a travesty in our country, a travesty to the will of our electorate. And I hope that good sense prevails in the next few hours. And there's going to be some euphoric moment in the leaders of the APNUFC that, you know, deja vu will strike, and 2015 will come back again, where they will respect the rule of law as they claimed they did then. And so the Constitution will take precedence, and the recon figures will be declared as tabulated and supervised by GECOM during the 33 days at the Artichoke Convention Center. So,
Nigel, we finished? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that. So I hope our people continue to remain patient, remain calm. We have been patient and calm for more than 5 years already. So whether it takes a few more days or a week more, APNU AFC will not be the government. Granger will not be the president. The People's Progressive Party Civic won the elections, and the People's Progressive Party Civic will be the next government. And we expect that all will come on board as we serve the people of Guyana to develop our country. And before I finally close, I'd just like to further, implore our citizens to ensure that you observe the COVID-19 safeguards. You know, wear your masks at all times, keep social distancing in place, 6 feet, I think, 3 to 6 feet. Avoid, contact that is unnecessary. Avoid crowds that are unnecessary. And please do not go about illegally protesting and making noise against democratic institutions. So once again, thanks for having us. And we do look forward to continuing what we have started since 1950, and that is to work with our people to develop our country.
Nigel, thank you very much for joining me this morning to update the Guyanese people on the current state of affairs um, in the country with regards to our elections. And I want to join you as well to say to our citizens to remain calm and patient. Um, this can only end one way. We're democracy, the will of the people will be there. Until 1 p.m. when we meet you again, we want to say thanks for being part of the program. Nigel, have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Edward.